My dad sold the antique watch my grandpa gave me for $46,000. He told Grandpa it was for insurance. It paid for my mom's new kitchen. When my grandpa found out, he did not yell. He just went quiet. Then he looked at me and said, "That watch was never really his to sell. My name is Valerie. I repair antique watches for a living. The kind people bring in after everyone else has already failed. Small wheels, tight springs, tiny pieces that only make sense if you know how to listen. I learned young, worked for years, and eventually opened a shop of my own. I am not rich. I am steady, good enough that people bring me the things they do not trust to anyone else. I want to tell you about Grandpa. His name is Hollis. He is the reason I do what I do. When I was 7 years old, he took me onto the back porch of his house one summer evening, and he sat me on his knee, and he undid the watch from his wrist and he laid it flat in the palm of his hand, and he said, "Look." That was all. Just the one word. He flipped a tiny lever on the side and opened the back of it and showed me the inside. The little wheels. The spring. The whole quiet machine that had been sitting against his pulse all day. I do not remember what he said next, if he said anything at all. I just remember leaning in so close, my forehead almost touched his hand. I do not think anything has ever felt that important to me again. I did not know it then, but that was the beginning of everything for me. My grandpa is older now. He moves slower, his eyes do not see as well as they used to. His hands shake a little bit at the dinner table when he is reaching for something. But there is one thing about his hands I want you to know. When he picks up a watch, they stop shaking. They had not forgotten this one. He used to wind that watch every morning the same way he made his coffee. The motion was so old in him that his fingers could do it while his eyes were on something else. He carried that watch through the war. He brought it home with him from things he never really talked about. He used to say it had reminded him over there that time could end. That was the only sentence I ever really got out of him about any of it. He kept the rest of it inside. He was a man who had decided early on that some things do not need to be told. Now I have to tell you about my dad. My dad's name is Curtis. He is the kind of man who looks fine from a few feet away. Suit, steady job, knows how to talk to a room, but there is a layer underneath that almost nobody saw, because my dad is good at the layer on top. About a year ago, he had gotten into a business arrangement with somebody he should not have. It went sideways. He owed money to people who did not send polite letters. He did not tell my mom. He did not tell my grandpa. He did not tell anybody. My dad solves problems by hiding them until they become other people's problems. What he did was this. He drove out to Grandpa's house one afternoon. He sat down at the kitchen table with him and he told him there was some paperwork to sign for the watch. Insurance, he said. Updating the appraisal. Things you do for a piece this valuable. My grandpa trusted him. My dad sold it the next day. He did not get a second opinion. He did not shop the price around. He took the first offer he got from a high-end dealer in the city. $46,000. The piece was worth more. A lot more. My dad was in a hurry. He took the first number that looked like a way out. He hid it for almost 2 months. When my grandpa finally asked when the watch was coming back, my dad took a breath the way he takes a breath when he is about to say something he has practiced. He said the watch had been sold. He said the money had already been used. He said it was handled. My grandpa sat very still in his chair and he asked my dad what he meant. And my dad looked at his own dad and said the sentence I am never going to forget. He said, "It was just a watch, Dad, let it go." I was not there when he said it. I heard about it later from one of my grandpa's neighbors, a woman who had been over for tea that afternoon and had been in the next room. She told me my grandpa did not yell, he did not cry, he just sat there, and then he said one short sentence back. He said, "I trusted my son." That was the whole thing. A few weeks later, I drove over to my mom and dad's house. I had not been there in months. They had remodeled the kitchen. New marble counters. New cabinets. New tile on the backsplash. My mom poured me a cup of coffee, and we sat on stools at the new island, and she told me my dad had finally gotten around to fixing it up. She said it like it was something that had just happened. I asked her when they had done it. She told me. I did the math in my head while I was holding the warm cup against my palms. The dates lined up exactly with the watch. I was sitting in my mom's new kitchen drinking coffee on top of Grandpa's watch. I did not say anything. I drank my coffee and I listened to her talk about a sale at a furniture store, and I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel. A few weeks went by. I was at the bench in my shop one afternoon working on a piece for a regular client when the bell over my door rang. A man I had never seen before walked in. He was holding out his wrist. He said his watch had stopped, and somebody downtown had told him I was the person to bring it to. Around here, I am usually the last stop for old watches other shops do not want to touch. I told him to have a seat. I unclasped it from his wrist. I turned it over in my hands. I knew before I checked anything, because my hands remembered it. I held the watch in my hands and I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I have held thousands of watches. There's a thing your hands learn after enough years of doing this kind of work. The weight, the way the crown turns, the little resistance the back gives when you go to open it. Every piece is its own small body, and this one was a body I had been near my whole life. I did not let my face show anything. The man across from me was sitting in the chair I keep for customers. He was scrolling through his phone. He had no idea what he had just put in front of me. I picked up my smallest tool and I opened the back of the case. Slowly, the way I would open it for any client. I knew what I was going to find before I saw it. There was an engraving on the inside of the back cover. 3 initials. A date. The initials were my grandma's. The date was the year she had married my grandpa. He had carried that engraving on the inside of his wrist for over 50 years, and he had never once told me it was there. Not when he showed me the inside of the watch on the porch when I was 7. Not on any of the hundreds of afternoons I had sat next to him since. He had kept it for himself. Some things a man does not pass down with words. I put the back of the case down on my bench very carefully, and I turned to the man in the chair and I asked him where he had bought it. He told me. A dealer in the city. He said he had paid a fair price. He said the dealer had told him the piece had come from an estate. I asked him if he would let me hold on to it for a day or two so I could give him an honest assessment. He said sure. I wrote up a slip the way I always write up a slip. Calm hands, slow pen. He left. The bell on the door rang once when he walked out, and I sat there at my bench in the empty shop with the watch in front of me, and I did not move for a long time. I did not call the police. I did not call a lawyer. I called Grandpa's neighbor, the woman who had been there the day my dad told him to let it go. I asked her one question. I asked her if my grandpa had ever signed any paperwork about the watch in the last several years that she knew of. She said yes. She said about 6 years ago, my grandpa had asked her to drive him to a notary one afternoon. He had not told her what it was for. She had waited in the car. He had come out with a folder. I drove to Grandpa's house that evening. I did not bring the watch with me. I sat down across from him on his couch and I asked him about the folder. His eyes did the slow thing they do now when a memory is coming up from a long way down. Then he nodded. He said yes. He said he had signed the watch over to me 6 years ago. Quietly. He had not told anybody. Not my dad, not my mom, not me. He said something had already shifted in my dad back then, and he had noticed it before anybody wanted to say it out loud. He said he wanted to make sure the watch ended up where it belonged. He looked at his lap when he said the next part. He said he had been hoping he was wrong. He had not been wrong. He looked up at me. He said, "Do you have it?" I said, "I do." He did not ask any other questions. He did not ask how. He did not ask where. He just closed his eyes for a second and let his head rest against the back of the chair. While he was sitting like that, I noticed his right hand. He had reached over and was touching his bare wrist with his thumb. The way you touch a place that used to have something on it. I do not think he knew he was doing it. I looked away because that one small movement was almost more than I could sit with. I drove to the dealer the next morning. I am not going to drag you through the meeting because the meeting did not matter as much as what came after it. I had the paperwork from 6 years ago. I had photographs of the engraving. I had a quiet voice and a clear story. I told the dealer the paperwork was clear and I would rather solve it quietly than turn it into a legal problem for everyone involved. At first, he gave me the careful, professional look people use when they think they can keep a thing contained. He said he had bought it in good faith. He said these situations could get complicated. Then he looked at the paperwork again, really looked at it. Something in his face changed. The dealer was not stupid. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who did not want trouble attached to his name. He went into a back office and stayed there long enough for me to hear a drawer open and close. When he came back, he had the man's contact information and an offer to make it right. 20 minutes later, the watch was mine again, properly and on paper. I walked out of that store with it in a small velvet bag in my coat pocket, and I did not let myself feel anything until I was back in my car. My dad called me that afternoon. I knew before I picked up that the dealer had called him. I almost did not answer. Then I did because I wanted to hear it out of his own mouth. He said, "What do you think you are doing?" I said, "Hi, Dad." He said, "That piece was a family matter." I said, "No, that piece was a theft. You stole from a man who trusted you because you were his son." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then he said something I have thought about a lot since. He said, "I did not think you would find it." That was the part that landed hardest. It was not anger. It was not denial. It was the quiet admission of a man who had taken something from his father and had assumed his daughter was small enough that she would never be the one who walked it back through the front door. He had been hiding it from a stranger he thought I was. He had not been hiding it from me. Because in his head, I was not the kind of person who finds things. I said, "You were wrong." I hung up. My mom called me about an hour later. She did not ask me how I was. She did not ask me about the watch. She said I was making things very difficult for my dad and that this was the kind of thing that should have been handled inside the family. I said inside the family is exactly where it had been handled. Then I said the only sentence I'd been holding on to since the morning in her new kitchen. I said, "You drink your coffee on top of that watch every morning." The line went very quiet. She did not say anything for a long second. Then she said she had to go. She hung up first. That was the last time we spoke for a while. I went back to the shop that night after closing. I locked the door from the inside. I turned off the lights in the front and I left the lamp on at my bench. I took the watch out of the velvet bag and I laid it down on the cloth. It was not in good shape. The dealer had handled it carelessly. The crystal had a small scratch. I did not think my grandpa would notice, but I would. The crown had been forced. The mechanism inside was running, but not the way it should have been running. It was a watch that had been treated like merchandise. I worked on it for a long time. I cleaned every piece. I polished the crystal. I tightened the things that had been left loose. I did not check the clock on the wall once. I sat there with my magnifier and my smallest tools, giving that watch back the dignity it deserved. I cleaned the engraving on the inside very gently with a soft cloth so I would not wear it down. The initials. The date. They were still there. They had been there longer than I had been alive. When I was done, I closed the back. I wound the crown. I held the watch up to my ear. I have listened to a lot of watches over the years. This one sounded like home. I do not know exactly when I started crying. I noticed it after a few minutes. My hands were still steady on the bench. The tears were just running. I was not making any sound. I think I cried because the watch was working again. I think I cried because there had been one stretch of 2 months where I had not known if it ever would be. I think I cried because fixing things is what I do, but this one was the hardest one I will ever do, and there was nobody in the shop to see it but me and a small machine that had finally come home. I let myself sit with it for about 5 minutes. Then I wiped my face. I put the watch in a soft cloth, and I put the cloth in a small box, and I put the box on my bench in front of the lamp. Tomorrow morning I was going to put it back where it belonged. I drove out to Grandpa's house the next morning. It was a quiet drive. I had the velvet pouch on the passenger seat next to me. I did not turn the radio on. I do not really remember thinking about anything in particular. I was just moving from one place to another with something in the seat next to me that did not belong in a pouch on a passenger seat. It belonged on a wrist. My grandpa was in his living room when I came in. He was in the same chair he is always in. He looked up. He smiled the small, slow smile he smiles now. I sat down across from him. I did not say anything for a few seconds. I just looked at him. His sleeve was pulled down over his wrist again the way it had been the last time. And I watched him do something I do not think he knew he was doing. He turned his arm slightly, the way somebody turns a wrist to check the time, and then he caught himself. He looked at his lap. He had been doing that motion for so many years that his body still went there, even though there was nothing there to look at anymore. I reached into my bag. I took out the pouch. I put it on the small table between us. I did not say what was inside it. I did not need to. My grandpa looked at it. Then he looked at me. Then back at the pouch. He reached out one hand, and his fingers were doing the small tremor they have been doing for the last couple of years. He picked up the pouch. He opened it. He tipped it slightly into the palm of his other hand. The watch slid out into his hand. His fingers stopped shaking the second they touched it. I have been thinking about that all week. The medical word for what is happening in his body has a name. It does not care about meaning. It does not care about what you used to wear on your wrist for 50 years. But somewhere underneath what his body is forgetting, there is something older. There is a piece of him that knows the weight of that watch, the way other pieces of how to ride a bike. He held it in his hand, and his hand became steady. Just for a few seconds, long enough to do what needed to be done. He turned it over. He opened the back of it the way he had opened it for me when I was 7. He looked at his wife's initials. He looked at the date underneath them. His mouth did something. Then his eyes did. Then he was crying very quietly across the small table from me, not the big kind. The kind that happens when something you thought was lost forever is suddenly back in your hand and your body has not had time to prepare a face for it. I did not say anything, I just sat there. There are some moments where the worst thing you can do is fill them with words. After a while he wiped his face with the back of his hand, the way men of his generation wiped their faces. He looked up at me. He said, "How did you find this?" I told him. The man. The shop. The bench. The initials. He listened all the way through. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said the only sentence he was going to say about it. He said, "The watch found you." He clipped it back onto his wrist himself. He did not let me help. He needed to be the one who put it back on. When it was clasped, he held his arm up, the way you hold something you have just finished building. Then he brought his wrist to the side of his head and he held it there for a couple of seconds with his eyes closed. He was listening to it tick. I want to tell you about that quiet little gesture, because it was the part that got me. He was not posing. He was not performing. He was a man who had not heard that specific sound against his own ear for a very long time, and he wanted to hear it again. The whole apology I had wanted from my dad on behalf of Grandpa happened in those couple of seconds in that quiet living room, and it happened without my dad anywhere in the room. I asked him, after a while, what he wanted me to do about my dad. He took a long time before he answered. He looked at the watch on his wrist. He looked out the window. Then he looked back at me and he said 2 short sentences. He said, "I cannot put my own son in jail." Then a pause. Then, "But I do not have to forgive him either." That was the whole answer. I drove home that afternoon. I did not call my dad. I did not write a long message. I took one photograph in Grandpa's living room before I left. The watch on his wrist. His other hand resting on the arm of the chair. You could not see his face in the picture. Just the wrist. I sent the photograph to my dad. No words. No caption. Just the picture. He did not respond for 2 days. When he finally did, all he sent was one line. He said, "I did not know it was that important to him." I read it. I did not write back. There was nothing in that sentence I needed to dignify with a reply. The sentence was for him to live with, not for me to fix. I wanted to tell you about my mom too, because some of you are probably waiting to hear what she did. She did not do anything. She did not call to apologize. She did not text. She did not show up at my shop. She is still in her remodeled kitchen every morning making coffee on top of the marble counter that came from the same money. She has not changed anything about that kitchen. She is not going to. She knows where that kitchen came from. She just is not ever going to say it. I drove past their house once a couple of weeks later. The kitchen lights were on. I could see her through the window, standing at the counter, cup of coffee in her hand. I did not stop. I drove home. Some people you visit. Some people you just drive past. I called my old teacher a few days later. His name was Petrov. He had taught me everything I knew when I was starting out. I told him the whole story. When I was done, he was quiet for a second. Then he said one thing. He said the watch had been mine before any of this happened. I had just spent a few weeks getting it back into the right room. I have thought about that a lot since. The next morning, I opened my shop the way I open my shop every morning. I unlocked the front door. I turned the sign in the window from closed to open. I went to the back and I made coffee in the little machine on the shelf next to my workbench. I sat down. The watch was on a small stand on the corner of my bench where I had put it the night before. My grandpa had asked me to keep it during the days and bring it to him only when he needed it on his wrist. He said his hands were not steady enough anymore to wind it himself every morning, and he wanted somebody he trusted to take care of it between visits. So now Grandpa's watch lives on the corner of my bench while I work. It is not for sale. It is not on display. It is just there, ticking quietly while I fix other people's broken things. The bell over my door rang at 10 that morning. A woman came in carrying a small wooden box. She said her grandmother had passed away last year, and there was an old watch in the box, and she did not know if it could still be saved. I said, "Let me see." She handed me the box. I opened it. I picked up the watch. It was not running. The crystal was scratched. There was something loose inside. A normal job for me. The kind of thing I do every week. I told her I would take a look. She thanked me, and she left. I sat at my bench for a second with her grandma's watch in one hand and the ticking of my own grandfather's watch coming from the corner of the bench in the other ear. I started working. That is what I do. I sit at a bench and I put the small things back together for the people who love them. My grandpa carried that watch through the war. My dad sold it without asking him. It came back to me on a stranger's wrist, in my own shop, on a Tuesday I was not ready for. I fixed it that night with the lamp on and the door locked and nobody watching. It is on his wrist again. Some mornings when I open my shop, I sit and listen to it tick from the corner of my bench, and it sounds like him. That is all. If you have an old watch or a ring or anything from somebody who is gone sitting in a drawer right now, this is your sign to wind it once today. Just once. So it knows you remembered. Before you go, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing where these stories find people. If this stayed with you, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and be gentle with the people who still make this world feel like home.